Picture this galloping through a moonlit forest, the weight of an entire kingdom's fate resting on your shoulders. The air is thick with tension, every shadow hiding potential danger, and the only sound is the pounding of your horse's hooves against the earth. This wasn't just a scene from a storybook. It was the daily reality for medieval battlefield messengers, the unsung lifelines of warfare. These men weren't just couriers. They were the invisible threads holding armies together, the silent architects of victory or defeat. And yet, their names are lost to history, their sacrifices overshadowed by the kings and knights they served. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on these forgotten heroes, uncovering the untold stories of their courage, cunning, and sheer determination in the face of impossible odds. What made these messengers so extraordinary wasn't just their willingness to risk their lives, it was how they did it. Imagine carrying a message so vital that its delivery could turn the tide of a battle, all while navigating a landscape riddled with enemy scouts, bandits, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. These weren't just riders, they were masters of disguise, experts in coded language, and sometimes the only hope for a besieged army waiting for reinforcements. They slipped through enemy lines like ghosts, their mission so secretive that even their own comrades often didn't know the full stakes, and if they were caught, the consequences were unthinkable. This was a world where failure wasn't just personal. It could mean the downfall of cities, the collapse of alliances, the end of dynasties. But why does their legacy matter today? Because these messengers were more than just medieval delivermen. They were the original information warriors, the precursors to modern communication networks. In an era before radios or satellites, their speed and reliability were the difference between chaos and order, between life and death on a massive scale. Their stories teach us about resilience, about the power of trust, and about the quiet heroes who shape history from the shadows. So as we journey through their world, you'll discover the ingenious tricks they used to outsmart their enemies, the heart-stopping close calls that defined their lives, and the enduring lessons their bravery holds for us even now. This isn't just a tale of the past, it's a testament to the human spirit, and it's about time these messengers got the recognition they deserve. To understand just how vital these messengers were, we have to travel back to the very roots of organized warfare. Even in ancient times, empires like Rome and Persia used relay systems of mounted couriers to maintain control over vast territories. But in the fractured world of medieval Europe, where borders shifted like the wind and battles could erupt without warning, the role of the messenger evolved into something far more perilous. These weren't just men carrying scrolls. They were living, breathing extensions of a commander's will, trusted with secrets that could make or break entire campaigns. Take the Byzantine Empire, for example, where elite messengers known as cursors rode along meticulously maintained roads, swapping horses at way stations to maintain blistering speed. Meanwhile, in the forests of medieval France, a lone rider might have to memorize his message entirely, destroying any physical evidence the moment it was delivered to prevent interception. The stakes were unimaginably high. A single delayed warning could mean the fall of a castle. A misheard order might lead to an entire battalion marching straight into an ambush. And while kings and generals planned their strategies from the safety of war tents, it was these messengers who turned those plans into reality, darting through enemy lines with nothing but their wits and a prayer. What set medieval messengers apart was their unique blend of skills. They weren't just fast, they were cunning. Some disguised themselves as merchants or pilgrims to slip past watchful eyes. Others used coded phrases, embedding crucial details in seemingly innocent conversations. There's even evidence of hollowed-out staffs or hidden compartments in clothing used to smuggle critical documents. Their training was intense, often starting young, as noble families groomed their sons for this dangerous but honorable duty. After all, who better to trust with a kingdom's secrets than someone whose loyalty was beyond question? Yet for all their importance, these messengers walked a razor's edge. Success brought little glory, but failure could mean disgrace or worse. Some were hunted down by rival factions. Others vanished without a trace, their fates lost to history. And yet, without them, the medieval world as we know it might have crumbled into chaos. They were the glue holding armies together, the silent pulse of communication in an age where information moved at the speed of a galloping horse. Their legacy isn't just in the battles they helped win, it's in the very idea that even in the darkest of times, there were those who could be trusted to carry the weight of the world. The life of a battlefield messenger wasn't for the faint of heart. It demanded a rare combination of physical prowess, razor-sharp wits, and unshakable loyalty. Selection began long before a rider ever set foot on a battlefield. Noble families often handpicked their most promising young men, usually second or third sons who wouldn't inherit land, but had the education and social standing to be trusted with sensitive information. These weren't just errand boys, they were chosen for their ability to think under pressure, their knack for languages, and their uncanny sense of direction. Some kingdoms even held grueling trials, pitting candidates against one another in races across treacherous terrain, or testing their memory by having them recite lengthy messages after days without sleep. Once chosen, training was relentless. Imagine spending months mastering the art of riding at full gallop while reading a map, or learning to recognize every fordable river crossing within a 50-mile radius. Messengers studied the subtle differences in regional dialects so they could blend in anywhere, and they memorized complex systems of coded phrases like referring to reinforcements as the harvest or an enemy camp as the wolf's den. Some were taught to write in cipher, scratching seemingly innocent love letters that concealed troop movements between the lines. Others practiced the art of misdirection, learning to lead pursuers astray by doubling back through streams or leaving false trails. Physical conditioning was brutal. These riders had to endure days in the saddle without rest, surviving on little more than dried meat and stolen moments of sleep. They trained to fight with lightweight weapons, daggers or short swords, not to engage in battle but to buy precious seconds if cornered. Stamina was everything. A messenger who collapsed from exhaustion was as good as dead. But perhaps the most harrowing part of their preparation was psychological. They drilled for scenarios no one should ever face. How to swallow a message if capture was imminent, how to withstand interrogation, even how to recognize poisoned food or drink. What's astonishing is how much of their knowledge was passed down through experience rather than written manuals. Veteran messengers would take apprentices on increasingly dangerous routes, teaching them to read the landscape like a living map, where to find sympathetic villagers who might offer shelter, which bridges were likely guarded, even how to interpret the flight patterns of birds as warnings of nearby movement. This wasn't just a job, it was a craft honed over lifetimes, and those who excelled became living legends among their peers. Yet for all their skill, their greatest weapon was something no training could fully instill: the sheer will to deliver their message, no matter the cost. That unbreakable determination is what made them the unsung heroes of medieval warfare, and it's why their legacy still echoes today. A messenger's survival often hinged on the equipment they carried, not just weapons, but tools designed for speed, secrecy, and sheer endurance. At the heart of their arsenal stood their horses, animals bred specifically for the demands of wartime dispatch. These weren't ordinary steeds but creatures of elite lineage, combining the swiftness of Arabian breeds with the rugged stamina of Northern European workhorses. A messenger's mount could cover 60 miles in a single day, navigating rocky passes and swollen rivers with equal grace. The bond between rider and horse was sacred. A well-trained animal could sense danger before its human counterpart, reacting to subtle cues like tightened reins or shifts in weight to avoid ambushes. Protection came in the form of lightweight armor, chainmail, shirts thin enough to allow free movement but sturdy enough to deflect stray arrows. Some messengers wore reinforced leather jerkins with hidden metal plates sewn into the lining, offering vital protection without sacrificing speed. Their helmets were equally practical, close-fitting steel caps with nasal guards, designed to stay secure during hard riding rather than withstand direct combat. Every ounce mattered when fleeing pursuers, so even their boots were tailored for the task, high enough to grip a horse's flanks but flexible for sprinting on foot if needed. But the true marvels were their concealment methods. Hollowed-out staffs carried rolled parchments, while wax-sealed letters might hide invisible ink between the lines. Some messengers sewn secret pockets into their cloaks, accessible only by intricate knots known to trusted recipients. One particularly ingenious trick involved writing messages on thin sheets of lead that could be rolled into scrolls no thicker than a quill, then slipped into the lining of a saddlebag. For authentication, they carried engraved tokens, distinctive medallions broken in half, with one piece held by the sender and the other by the messenger. When reunited, the matching halves proved the message's legitimacy. Communication across distances relied on ingenuity. Signal flags in specific colors or patterns could relay prearranged codes between hilltops, while polished metal mirrors flashed sunlight in precise sequences. Horn calls followed strict musical patterns. 3 short blasts might warn of an approaching enemy, while a sustained note could signal safe passage. The most critical messages, however, were often memorized verbatim, a skill honed through relentless practice. A single misremembered word could doom an entire battalion, so messengers trained to repeat lengthy dispatches backward if captured, ensuring the true meaning stayed hidden until reaching its destination. What's striking is how these tools evolved in response to ever-growing threats. As interceptors learned to search saddlebags, messengers began embedding documents within the horse's tack itself. When wax seals became easy to counterfeit, kingdoms developed intricate signet rings with unique flaws, a chipped edge or an irregular crest that only trusted officials could recognize. This constant innovation wasn't just about technology, it reflected the profound trust placed in these men. Their equipment wasn't merely functional, it was a testament to the desperate creativity of an era where information was both the deadliest weapon and the most precious lifeline. The art of secret communication transformed ordinary messages into lifelines of war, ingenious systems designed to outwit even the most determined interceptors. At its simplest, this meant substituting letters or words in a message according to prearranged patterns. A common cipher might shift each letter 3 places down the alphabet, turning "attack at dawn" into DWWDFN to baffle prying eyes. But the most skilled messengers took this far beyond basic codes. Some memorized entire dictionaries of symbolic language, where a phrase like "the falcon flies south" could secretly signal the movement of cavalry. Others carried poems with letters subtly marked by pinpricks, forming hidden words when read vertically. Invisible ink, often made from lemon juice or milk, allowed messengers to scribble innocuous love letters that revealed battle plans only when held over a flame. There are accounts of messages etched onto the thin skins of apples eaten by the recipient to destroy the evidence after reading. Some kingdoms employed talking staffs, wooden rods carved with notches that corresponded to prearranged meanings when counted by trusted hands. Even the humble wax seal became a tool of deception. Certain lords pressed their rings into wax at deliberate angles to confirm authenticity, knowing an imposter wouldn't replicate the exact tilt. But the most secure messages never touched parchment at all. Elite messengers trained for years to commit lengthy dispatches to memory, sometimes reciting them backward during interrogations to conceal their true purpose. In one remarkable case from the 100 Years' War, a French rider captured by English forces sang what seemed like a drunken tavern song, only for his countrymen to recognize it days later as encoded troop positions hidden in the lyrics. The stakes of these deceptions were brutally high. A messenger caught with a decipherable code might face torture to reveal its key, while one who succeeded could alter the fate of nations without leaving a single written word behind. What's astonishing is how these methods mirrored the broader tensions of medieval society. Just as castles had hidden postern gates and kings employed food tasters, messengers operated in a world where trust was scarce and paranoia was survival. Their craft wasn't just about carrying words, it was about ensuring those words reached the right ears and no others. This relentless innovation in secrecy didn't just protect messages, it shaped the very nature of warfare, turning information into a weapon as sharp as any sword. Every mile a messenger rode was a dance with danger, where the slightest misstep could be fatal. Enemy forces knew that severing communication lines was as effective as defeating an army in the field, so they deployed scouts along every major road and mountain pass. These watchers weren't just looking for troops, they were hunting solitary riders, the lone figures whose speed made them vulnerable. A snapped twig, the glint of sunlight on metal, even the distant whinny of a horse could betray a messenger's position. Capture wasn't just a risk, it was a death sentence. Interrogations were brutal, designed to extract every shred of intelligence before the courier's inevitable execution. Some messengers carried poison rings or hidden blades, not for combat, but to deny their captors the satisfaction of breaking them. Nature itself was as merciless as any enemy. A sudden storm could turn a gentle stream into a raging torrent, forcing desperate detours that added hours to a journey. Mountain trails crumbled underfoot, and dense forests became labyrinths where riders could vanish without a trace. Winter posed its own nightmares. Snow hid treacherous ice, and freezing temperatures numbed fingers until rain slipped from grasp. Starvation was a silent stalker, foraging was risky, and stolen meals might be poisoned. Exhaustion blurred vision and dulled reflexes, making fatal errors more likely with each passing mile. There are accounts of messengers found dead in their saddles, their horses still plodding forward, guided by instinct long after their riders had succumbed to fatigue. Disguise offered little reassurance. A merchant's robes might fool a casual observer, but enemy border guards were trained to spot inconsistencies: the wrong accent, a sword callous on a supposed trader's hand, or a horse bred for speed rather than cargo. Pilgrims were scrutinized just as closely, their satchels searched for hidden dispatches. The cleverest messengers avoided roads altogether, navigating by stars or memorized landmarks, sleeping in caves or hollow trees to avoid detection. But even the best prepared could fall victim to betrayal. A bribed innkeeper, a jealous rival, or a desperate peasant might reveal their presence for a handful of coins. The psychological burden was crushing. Unlike soldiers who shared the terrors of battle, messengers faced their trials alone. Every shadow held potential ambush, every stranger a possible enemy. The weight of their mission was constant, knowing that a delayed message might mean the slaughter of comrades, the fall of a city, the collapse of a king's grand strategy. Some developed rituals to steady their nerves, whispering prayers or repeating mantras as they rode. Others buried their fear beneath cold professionalism, treating each journey as a puzzle to be solved rather than a nightmare to endure. Yet what's most astonishing is how rarely they failed. Against impossible odds, these riders pressed on, driven by something deeper than duty, an unshakable belief that their mission mattered. That somewhere beyond the next ridge, an army waited for their word. A general needed their news. A kingdom's fate hinged on their stamina and cunning. Their stories aren't just tales of survival. They're reminders of how far humans will go when the stakes are highest, and how history often turns on the courage of those whose names it never bothers to record. Among these legendary figures, Jean de Joinville stands as a towering example of a messenger whose deeds transcended mere duty. As chronicler and confidant to King Louis IX of France, Joinville didn't just carry messages, he became part of the history he recorded. His most famous ride came during the Seventh Crusade, when he braved enemy patrols and treacherous terrain to deliver a plea for reinforcements to Allied forces. What made his mission extraordinary wasn't just the distance covered, but how he transformed setbacks into triumphs. When his horse collapsed from exhaustion, he continued on foot. When bandits ambushed his party, he escaped by swimming a freezing river under arrow fire. And when he finally reached his destination, his first-hand account of the king's desperate situation rallied commanders who had been hesitating to act. Joinville's legacy endures because he embodied the messenger's highest ideal, loyalty so fierce it could alter the course of events. Equally remarkable but far less known was the unnamed rider who alerted Eastern Europe to the Mongol invasion in the mid-13th century. As Genghis Khan's forces swept westward like a storm, this lone courier raced ahead of the advancing horde, reaching besieged cities with just enough warning for civilians to flee. Historians believe he traveled nearly 200 miles in 3 days, changing horses at monasteries along the way. His identity remains lost to time, but his actions likely saved thousands. Unlike Joinville, whose fame was preserved in illuminated manuscripts, this messenger vanished into legend, proof that history often remembers the message but forgets the messenger. Then there's the curious case of Rodrigo Diaz, a Spanish courier who turned deception into an art form during the Reconquista. Captured by Moorish forces while carrying sensitive troop movements, Diaz pretended illiteracy and convinced his captors the document he carried was a harmless supply list. After being released, he memorized every detail of the enemy camp's layout and defenses, delivering not just his original message but priceless intelligence that led to a decisive victory. His story highlights a truth often overlooked. The best messengers were masters of observation, gathering as much information as they delivered. These individuals shared more than bravery. They possessed an almost supernatural ability to judge risk. Take Philippa of Hainault, Queen of England, who famously disguised herself as a merchant's daughter to pass through enemy lines with vital negotiations during the 100 Years' War. Her success relied not on speed alone, but on understanding human nature, knowing that guards would scrutinize a noblewoman but overlook a common traveler. Similarly, the Scottish messenger Robert Boyd earned his place in legend by using bagpipe music to mask coded messages, playing certain tunes to signal troop movements right under English sentries' noses. What binds these stories together is how they redefine heroism. These weren't warriors clad in shining armor, but ordinary people who performed extraordinary acts through wit, endurance, and sheer force of will. They remind us that history's most pivotal moments often hinge not on grand battles, but on the individuals who slipped through the shadows to make those battles possible. Their legacies challenge us to look beyond the obvious heroes, because sometimes the most important person in the room is the one who just rode in from the storm. Siege warfare transformed battlefield messengers from mere couriers into lifelines of survival. Picture a walled city surrounded by enemy forces, its gates barred, its people slowly starving, cut off from the world except for the daring few who slipped through the chokehold of blockades. These weren't just deliveries, they were acts of desperation. A single messenger carrying word to allies could mean the difference between rescue and ruin. Some crawled through forgotten sewers or secret tunnels dug beneath siege lines, emerging covered in filth but clutching priceless dispatches. Others timed their escapes with precision, waiting for storms or the distraction of an enemy assault to scale down ropes under cover of darkness. The most resourceful even disguised themselves as enemy soldiers, blending into supply caravans to bypass watchful sentries. The stakes couldn't have been higher. During the siege of Constantinople in 1453, messengers risked the Ottoman naval blockade by swimming between gaps in the chain barrier, their mouths clamped around wax-sealed letters to keep them dry. In medieval Spain, besieged cities relied on carrier pigeons, but when birds were shot down or weather grounded them, human couriers became the only hope. One account from the Crusades tells of a messenger who survived 3 days without water, weaving through enemy camps by hiding inside a rolled-up carpet strapped to a camel. These weren't just journeys, they were audacious feats of endurance where failure meant not just death but the fall of an entire community. Negotiations hung on their shoulders too. When a city's walls began to crumble under bombardment, messengers were the ones who carried surrender terms or pleas for one last reprieve. They walked a knife's edge, delivering ultimatums that could spare civilians or provoke retaliation. During the Siege of Orleans, a single misdelivered phrase nearly doomed Joan of Arc's forces until a second rider corrected the error in time. The psychological toll was immense. These couriers weren't just transporting words, they were bearing the weight of thousands of lives, knowing a misstep could trigger massacre or salvation. What's often overlooked is how sieges forced messengers to innovate under pressure. With traditional routes cut off, they became masters of improvisation, using coded knocks on city gates, disguising messages as laundry hung to dry, or even employing children to slip through gaps too small for adults. In Krakow, defenders once floated messages downstream in hollowed-out loaves of bread, trusting the current to carry them to allies. The ingenuity didn't stop there. Some cities developed elaborate pulley systems to hoist messengers over walls under cover of fog, while others trained dogs to sprint through enemy lines with tiny scrolls tucked into their collars. Yet for all their cunning, the human cost was staggering. Records from the 100 Years' War describe messengers caught outside Toulouse, their hands severed as warnings to others attempting escape. Others were paraded before besieged walls in cages, their suffering used to break defenders' morale. This was warfare stripped to its cruelest essentials, where isolating a city meant starving it of information as ruthlessly as food. And still, the messengers kept coming. Their stories remind us that in the darkest hours of conflict, courage isn't always flashy banners or heroic last stands. Sometimes it's a shadow darting past enemy fires, a whisper through a crack in a gate, or one exhausted rider collapsing at the feet of a king with the words that would change everything. History often paints medieval warfare as a world of armored knights and battle-hardened soldiers, but beneath that surface thrived a network of women who turned societal expectations into strategic advantages. While men faced scrutiny at every checkpoint, women moved through war zones with a cloak of invisibility, their perceived domestic roles masking their true purpose. Noblewomen like Elena of Aquitaine didn't just attend royal courts as diplomats. They memorized troop deployments whispered over feasts, hiding battle plans in the folds of their sleeves or the embroidery of their gowns. When Elena traveled between England and France during the 12th century, her entourage wasn't just a display of power. It was a carefully orchestrated information pipeline, with ladies-in-waiting passing coded messages as they adjusted each other's headdresses or shared seemingly idle gossip. Peasant women played an equally vital role, their anonymity becoming their greatest weapon. A basket of eggs could conceal a map tucked beneath straw, while a lullaby hummed at a village well might carry troop movements in its rhythm. During the Hussite Wars, Bohemian women smuggled letters inside loaves of bread or hollowed out distaffs used for spinning wool, objects no soldier would think to confiscate. Some even sewed messages into the hems of children's clothing, exploiting the unspoken rule that mothers and infants were rarely searched. The sheer ingenuity of these methods reveals a stark truth. Women didn't just participate in wartime communication, they perfected the art of hiding in plain sight. Religious women had unique advantages. Nuns traversing battle lines under the pretext of charity work could carry sealed parchments in prayer books or reliquaries, their sacred vows deterring suspicion. Chronicles from the Albigensian Crusade describe a Benedictine sister who slipped through enemy camps by offering medical aid, her herb satchel packed with dispatches wrapped in medicinal leaves. Even pilgrimages became cover for espionage. A woman weeping at a shrine might leave behind not just prayers, but vital intelligence tucked beneath a votive candle. The risks these women took were staggering. Capture meant not just execution, but the threat of torture or public humiliation designed to deter others. In 1429, during the Siege of Orleans, a young laundress named Marguerite was caught carrying a message stitched into a linen shift. Rather than reveal her contacts, she swallowed the thread, an act of defiance that cost her life but saved countless others. Stories like hers remind us that courage wore many faces in the medieval world, some hidden beneath veils or sun-weathered aprons. What's most revolutionary about these women isn't just their bravery, it's how they reshaped the battlefield itself. By exploiting gaps in their enemies' assumptions, they turned domestic spaces into theaters of war and everyday objects into tools of resistance. Their legacy challenges us to look beyond the obvious heroes, to recognize that history's most pivotal messages weren't always carried by riders in armor. Sometimes, they traveled in the hands of a woman gathering herbs, or in the song a mother sang to her child as the shadow of war loomed over them both. The relay systems that crisscrossed medieval battlefields weren't just about speed. They were feats of logistics that would impress even modern generals. Picture a line of way stations stretching across rugged terrain, each manned by riders and fresh horses ready to sprint the next leg of a messaged journey. This wasn't just about swapping mounts, it was a carefully choreographed dance of timing and trust. The Byzantine Empire's cursus publicus set the gold standard, with wayposts spaced roughly 10 miles apart, the maximum distance a horse could gallop at full speed before exhaustion. Riders would arrive breathless, thrust their sealed dispatches into the hands of waiting comrades, and collapse as fresh messengers took up the charge. A message could race from Constantinople to Antioch, a distance of over 500 miles, in less than a week, a dizzying speed for the era. But the true brilliance of these networks lay in their redundancy. Strongholds didn't just serve as pit stops, they were nerve centers where messages were verified, copied, and sometimes even split into multiple routes to ensure delivery. If one rider fell to bandits or a bridge collapsed in a storm, duplicate dispatches might already be racing along alternate paths. The Mongols perfected this during their conquests, using a system of mounted couriers called Yam that spanned their entire empire. Marco Polo marveled at how these riders could cover 300 miles in a single day by swapping horses at relay points, their saddlebags stuffed with everything from military orders to intelligence on rebel movements. Coordination was everything. At each station, meticulous records tracked departure times and expected arrivals, an early form of logistics management. Some kingdoms used tally sticks notched with arrival times to monitor delays, while others employed password systems to verify messengers' authenticity. The stakes couldn't be higher. A single compromised relay station could funnel false orders into the network, misleading entire armies. That's why the most critical messages often traveled with twin couriers, one carrying the written dispatch, the other memorizing its contents as a living backup. What's often overlooked is how these systems doubled as early warning networks. A rider galloping into a station with a lit torch at night or a flagged spear by day could trigger prearranged signals, smoke from hilltops, the ringing of specific church bells that mobilized defenses long before the message itself arrived. During the Reconquista, Spanish outposts used mirror flashes to alert the next station of approaching danger, buying precious hours to prepare. These weren't just communication lines. They were the nervous system of medieval warfare, pulsing with information that could mean the difference between a kingdom's survival and its collapse. The legacy of these networks endures in surprising ways. Modern emergency dispatch systems trace their roots to these medieval relays, and the principle of redundant messaging lives on in everything from internet data packets to satellite communications. But perhaps their most lasting lesson is about human ingenuity under pressure, how societies stretched across impossible distances found ways to whisper to one another, turning isolation into connection and chaos into order, one galloping horse at a time. To understand what propelled these messengers into the jaws of danger, we must step into the medieval mind, a world where concepts like honor and obligation carried life or death weight. For noble-born couriers, loyalty wasn't just sentiment, it was the bedrock of their identity. Raised on tales of ancestral oaths, they saw themselves as living links in an unbroken chain of service. A single failed mission could tarnish a family's reputation for generations. This explains why some riders chose death over surrender, like the Burgundian messenger who, when captured during the Wars of the Roses, bit through his own tongue rather than risk revealing secrets under torture. His mutilation wasn't just resistance, it was a grim calculation that his silence would preserve his lord's trust in future couriers from his bloodline. But not all messengers were driven by feudal duty. For landless knights and younger sons barred from inheritance, courier work offered rare opportunities. Successful missions could earn them estates, titles, or royal favor, like William de Wendinel, whose daring ride through Scottish lines in 1392 won him a manor still bearing his name. The profession also became a proving ground for ambitious commoners. A peasant's son with a sharp mind and strong horsemanship might rise to become a trusted royal messenger, his children lifted into gentry. These weren't just jobs, they were social elevators disguised as suicide missions, where the promise of advancement outweighed the ever-present risk. Yet for every volunteer, there were countless conscripts pressed into service. Medieval chronicles mention message levies, villages required to provide riders just as they furnished soldiers or laborers. These unwilling participants faced horrific choices: desert and see your family punished, or ride straight into an enemy's crosshairs. Some turned their fear into cunning, like the English farmer recorded in the pipe rolls who deliberately took slow routes until his lord stopped summoning him. Others found unexpected camaraderie. The shared terror of night rides and near captures forged bonds stronger than blood among these reluctant brothers in arms. What united all messengers, willing or not, was a particular breed of mental toughness. Modern psychologists might call it adaptive hypervigilance, the ability to remain acutely aware of threats without paralysis. Contemporary training manuals advised couriers to see the forest as 100 hiding places, the road as a trail of traps. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The best developed an almost supernatural situational awareness, noticing disturbed leaves where an ambush might lurk or detecting the faint metallic scent of armor hidden beneath travelers' cloaks. Their journals reveal meticulous rituals, checking horses' ears for tension, a sign of unseen danger, rehearsing cover stories during monotonous stretches, even practicing facial expressions to feign ignorance if questioned. Perhaps most astonishing was their capacity for compartmentalization. A messenger might spend an afternoon joking with innkeepers, fully present in the moment, while a part of his mind continuously mapped escape routes and weighed every stranger's potential as friend or foe. This mental duality, engaging with the world while always preparing to flee it, left its mark. Accounts from retired couriers describe recurring dreams of endless riding or flinching at sudden noises decades after their last mission. The medieval world had no term for what we now call post-traumatic stress, but they recognized the toll. A 14th century French ballad laments the hollow-eyed men who jump at church bells, understood by all to be veteran messengers. What emerges from these fragments isn't just a portrait of medieval duty, but a revelation about human resilience. These men and women weren't fearless, they were terrified and rode anyway. Their motivations spanned the spectrum from blind loyalty to cold ambition to sheer desperation, yet they shared an unshakable commitment to the one principle that bound their chaotic profession: the message must get through. In an age before psychology textbooks, they mastered the art of stress management through sheer necessity, writing the first unwritten manual on how to keep moving forward when every instinct screams to turn back. That legacy of ordinary people performing extraordinary feats, not because they wanted to, but because someone had to, may be their most enduring message of all. Few scenarios struck terror into medieval commanders like the news that a messenger had been intercepted. The ripple effects of a single captured dispatch could unravel months of strategy in moments. Consider the disaster at Crecy in 1346, when French forces ambushed an English courier carrying detailed battle plans. The intercepted documents revealed not just troop numbers, but the exact positions of longbow units, information the French used to launch a disastrous frontal assault that cost thousands of lives. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a security breach that reshaped the 100 Years' War, proving how one vulnerable rider could tilt the scales of an entire campaign. The methods of interception were as varied as they were ruthless. Enemy scouts patrolled known messenger routes, setting traps along narrow mountain passes or river crossings where riders had limited escape options. Some interceptors used trained falcons to strike messengers' horses mid-gallop, sending both rider and precious cargo tumbling into waiting hands. Others infiltrated way stations, poisoning water supplies or bribing stable hands to swap fresh mounts for exhausted nags that would collapse miles from safety. The most cunning interceptors didn't even need to capture messengers, they simply followed them at a distance, allowing the courier to lead them straight to hidden camps or vulnerable supply lines. When capture was inevitable, messengers faced agonizing choices. The bravest opted for immediate destruction, chewing sealed letters into pulp or tossing them into nearby fires. During the Albigensian Crusade, one desperate rider sewed a message into his own arm wound, knowing the bloodied bandage would deter inspection long enough for him to reach allies. But not all had such fortitude. Under torture, even the most loyal might break. like the Saxon messenger recorded in the Annals of Fulda, who, after days on the rack, revealed the location of his king's winter camp, leading to a massacre. The psychological warfare was brutal. Some interceptors would send back mutilated survivors as warnings, their missing fingers or branded faces serving as grim advertisements of the price of failure. The consequences rippled far beyond the battlefield. An intercepted peace overture could prolong wars for years, as happened when Burgundian forces captured a French envoy carrying secret reconciliation terms in 1415. Diplomatic marriages collapsed when love letters between betrothed nobles fell into rival hands, edited to suggest infidelity. Entire spy networks evaporated thanks to a single compromised cipher, like the Venetian Bocca di Leone system cracked by Milanese interrogators in 1423. The fear of interception became so pervasive that some lords refused to commit sensitive plans to writing at all, relying entirely on memorized rhymes or songs, a practice that sometimes backfired when messengers misremembered key details. What's chilling is how these medieval struggles mirror modern cybersecurity dilemmas. The same principles that made a 13th century wax seal vulnerable to forgery apply to today's phishing scams. Both exploit trust in familiar appearances. When a Mongol messenger hid dispatches inside hollowed-out melons, he wasn't so different from a modern agent using encrypted thumb drives. The stakes may have changed, but the human drama remains identical. The race against time, the battle of wits between protector and interceptor, the unbearable weight of knowing that a single moment's lapse could doom thousands. These aren't just tales from dusty parchments, they're reminders that information has always been the most dangerous weapon of all, and those who carry it bear burdens few could endure. When swords were sheathed and banners furled, medieval messengers transformed from wartime lifelines into the vital arteries of peacetime civilization. Far from idle between conflicts, these riders became the beating heart of diplomacy, their saddlebags stuffed not with battle plans but with marriage contracts, trade agreements, and royal decrees that wove kingdoms together. Picture a silk-clad courier galloping from Paris to Toledo with a betrothal agreement between royal houses. Every ornate phrase in those documents could solidify alliances stronger than any fortress wall. The same skills that made messengers invaluable in war: discretion, endurance, and an uncanny sense of timing, made them indispensable in maintaining the delicate dance of medieval statecraft. Commerce relied on their speed just as heavily as crowns did. Merchant guilds paid handsomely for couriers who could outpace competitors with news of crop failures or spice shipments, their dispatches swaying market prices across continents. Records from Venetian archives reveal how a single day's head start on trade information could mean the difference between bankruptcy and fortune. Some messengers specialized in this shadow economy, memorizing the going rates for wool in Flanders or the arrival dates of Genoese caravans. They weren't just carrying letters, they were transmitting the lifeblood of medieval globalization, their routes mirroring the web of trade that connected furs from Novgorod to silks from Constantinople. Royal governance would have collapsed without them. When English kings needed to enforce new laws in distant shires, it was messengers who raced from village to village, reading proclamations in market squares and collecting signatures from wary nobles. Their arrival often marked a community's first contact with central authority, a tangible reminder that beyond local disputes stood a crown expecting obedience. The famous Domesday Book survey of 1086 relied on armies of such riders fanning out across England, gathering the minutiae of landholdings and livestock that would define tax obligations for generations. What's often overlooked is how these peacetime duties required entirely different skills than wartime service. Negotiating with suspicious border guards demanded charm rather than stealth, while delivering unpopular tax notices required thick skin and quick reflexes of another sort. Some messengers developed reputations as master mediators, smoothing over diplomatic slights before they escalated, like the Burgundian envoy who averted war in 1322 by personally explaining his duke's drunken insult to the French king. Others became walking archives of local customs, knowing which lords expected gifts with their messages and which monasteries would demand scriptural recitations before accepting papal bulls. The rhythm of their work changed too. Instead of frantic dashes through hostile territory, peacetime messengers often followed seasonal circuits delivering spring planting orders, summer festival invitations, autumn tax reminders. Their arrivals became events unto themselves, bringing news of distant births, deaths, and scandals to isolated communities. Parish records show villagers sometimes paid messengers extra to linger and share gossip, turning these couriers into living newspapers. This dual life reveals a profound truth about medieval society. The difference between war and peace was often just the contents of a saddlebag. The same hands that once carried declarations of war later bore treaties ending them. The horses that raced past burning villages in June might trot past harvest festivals in October. Messengers didn't just serve both worlds, they were among the few who could navigate the fragile boundary between them, their journeys proving that even in an age of castles and swords, information remained the true currency of power. The medieval world's messenger systems didn't just evolve, they underwent a revolution driven by the relentless demands of expanding empires and increasingly complex warfare. By the late Middle Ages, the sporadic riders of earlier centuries had given way to organized courier networks that functioned with almost clockwork precision. Take the Venetian Republic's famed Corriere della Serenissima, a state-run service where riders clad in distinct blue and gold livery raced between Venice and its far-flung trading posts. These weren't ad hoc volunteers but salaried professionals, their schedules so regimented that merchants could predict arrival times within hours, a medieval precursor to modern tracking systems. What made these services groundbreaking wasn't just their speed, but their reliability. For the first time, communication became something you could build strategies around rather than gamble upon. The real game changer, though, was infrastructure. Kings and city-states began investing in dedicated messenger roads, paths cleared of bandits, dotted with guard towers, and studded with way stations where horses could be swapped in minutes. The Holy Roman Empire's Kaiserliche Post routes, established in the 15th century, featured raised causeways that stayed passable in muddy seasons, while the French crown mandated that every village along royal roads keep fresh mounts ready for couriers. These weren't just conveniences, they were force multipliers, shrinking distances between armies and their commanders in ways that reshaped battlefield tactics. A general could now coordinate maneuvers across multiple fronts, trusting that his orders would arrive in time to matter. Yet humans weren't the only creatures enlisted in this communication arms race. Carrier pigeons, their homing instincts honed through selective breeding, became the medieval equivalent of instant messaging. The Sultan of Baghdad's famed pigeon post could relay news from Syria to Iraq in under a day, with birds carrying silk-threaded messages in tiny lead capsules. Even more dramatic were beacon chains, networks of hilltop fires that could flash warnings across entire kingdoms in hours. When the Spanish Reconquista reached its climax in 1492, it was a line of smoking beacons that first alerted Granada to the fall of its outer defenses, the signal leaping from peak to peak faster than any horse could hope to match. What's easy to overlook is how these innovations reflected deeper societal shifts. The rise of professional courier services mirrored the growing specialization of medieval labor, Just as blacksmiths and scribes became distinct trades, so too did messengers transition from part-time duty to skilled career. The standardization of routes foreshadowed modern logistics, while beacon systems demonstrated an early understanding of network theory. Even failures spurred progress. When Mongol invaders disrupted European pigeon lofts in the 13th century, it prompted experiments with alternative methods like trained falcons carrying miniature scrolls. The legacy of these systems hums quietly through our modern world. The relay stations that once dotted medieval roads find their echo in today's fiber optic hubs, just as carrier pigeons' speed anticipated satellite communications. But perhaps their most enduring lesson is about human adaptability, how societies under pressure will always find new ways to bridge the gaps between them, turning isolation into connection, one innovation at a time. These weren't just improvements on old methods, they were glimpses of a future where distance would no longer dictate destiny. Some messenger stories blur the line between history and legend tales so extraordinary they etch themselves into collective memory. Take the infamous ride of Gottfried von Berlichingen, a German courier who allegedly escaped capture by leaping his horse off a 30-foot cliff into the Neckar River. Contemporary chronicles describe him surfacing downstream, still clutching his dispatch case, his pursuers left gaping from the cliffs above. Whether every detail is accurate matters less than what the story reveals. These weren't just trained riders, but near mythic figures who seemed to bend the laws of physics in their determination to deliver. Then there's the curious account of Elena de Montfort's messenger during the Barons' War. Cornered by royalist forces in a Lincolnshire barn, the quick-thinking courier disguised himself as a scarecrow, standing motionless among the straw for 8 hours until his hunters gave up. The tale endures not just for its theatrical flair, but for showcasing the psychological warfare these messengers waged. Sometimes the best hiding place wasn't in shadows, but in plain sight where arrogance blinded enemies to the obvious. Perhaps no story captures the public imagination like that of the phantom courier of the 100 Years' War. French records tell of an English rider who, after being stabbed by bandits, allegedly tied his own intestines with a belt and rode another 20 miles to deliver his message before collapsing at the commander's feet. Medical experts debate whether such a feat was possible, but that's almost beside the point. The legend's endurance speaks to how medieval societies memorialized these figures, not just as men, but as near superhuman embodiments of duty. What's fascinating is how these stories evolved across cultures. While European tales emphasize physical endurance, Middle Eastern chronicles celebrate intellectual cunning. One Persian messenger facing certain capture supposedly released a bag of coins behind him, knowing his greedy pursuers would stop to fight over the treasure. Mongolian accounts describe riders who survived the steppes by drinking their horses' blood when water ran out. Each culture's legends reveal what they valued most: brute resilience, quick thinking, or the ability to endure unimaginable deprivation. Even when stripped of exaggeration, the reality remains staggering. Parish records from Normandy confirm a local courier who swam 3 miles through icy waters after his boat sank, holding the king's letter in his teeth. Swiss archives detail a teenage messenger who evaded Austrian patrols by hiding inside a hollow oak for 2 days. These weren't fairy tales, they were real people performing acts that defied ordinary limits, their exploits becoming the yardstick against which others measured their courage. The deeper truth in these stories lies in what they tell us about medieval values. A society that celebrated such extreme dedication reveals its own priorities, where completing a mission mattered more than survival itself. These messengers knew their names might vanish from history, but their actions would ripple through generations. Whether leaping cliffs or outwitting armies, they embodied an unspoken code. The message must always come first, no matter the cost. That single-minded devotion, more than any single feat, is why their legends still gallop through our imaginations centuries later. The crack of gunpowder weapons didn't just change how wars were fought, it rewrote the rules of communication itself. As cannons roared across 16th century battlefields, the medieval messenger's era quietly slipped into twilight. Standing armies with permanent command structures no longer relied on lone riders darting between fragmented feudal forces. Why wait days for a courier when signal flags could relay orders across regiments in minutes? The rise of standardized military drills meant soldiers moved in predictable formations, reducing the need for frantic last-minute dispatches. Even the landscape of war transformed. Sprawling siege camps gave way to tightly organized field positions where officers could shout commands and be heard. The age of individual messengers, those shadowy figures who once held kingdoms in their saddlebags, was ending not with a fanfare, but with the slow, inevitable march of progress. Yet their disappearance wasn't sudden. Early gunpowder armies still used mounted couriers, but now as part of broader systems. The Spanish tercios of the 1500s employed relay networks where messages hopped between fortified positions rather than traversing open country. Venetian arsenals experimented with timed flares that could coordinate naval movements across miles of coastline, a far cry from the days when a single boat might row for hours to deliver battle updates. What faded wasn't the need for communication, but the romantic ideal of the solitary rider braving impossible odds. The new warfare valued uniformity over individual heroism, and messengers became cogs in vast military machines rather than wildcards who could alter fate with their wits. Folklore, however, refused to let them go. The 17th century saw a surge in ballads and chapbooks glorifying messenger exploits from bygone eras like the fictional Black Jacques, who supposedly rode through the 30 Years' War delivering letters inked with his own blood. Military academies preserved their techniques, teaching cadets how to memorize encrypted orders in the old style as a test of discipline. Some traditions endured in surprising ways. The British Army's 19th century galloper officers who carried Wellington's commands at Waterloo were direct descendants of medieval couriers, right down to their lightweight sabers designed for speed over combat. The most profound legacy, though, lay in the birth of modern intelligence networks. Messengers hadn't just carried letters, they'd been early spies, observers, and analysts. Their methods of disguise, coded language, and route finding became foundational to espionage tradecraft. When Cardinal Richelieu established France's first formal spy service in the 1600s, his recruits studied medieval couriers' tricks for slipping past border guards. Even today, Special Forces survival courses teach techniques eerily similar to those used by messengers evading capture 8 centuries earlier, proof that while the horses are gone, the cunning remains. What truly vanished was something harder to define: the intimate connection between a single rider's courage and the fate of nations. Modern warfare distributes risk across systems and technologies, but medieval messengers shouldered it alone. Their decline marked more than a tactical shift. It was the end of a world where information moved at the speed of a galloping heart, where one person's endurance could tilt history. We're left with their echoes, in the adrenaline of a breaking news alert, the urgency of a crisis hotline, the quiet heroism of those who still run toward danger carrying words that might save others. The messengers are gone, but the weight they carried lingers wherever speed and trust mean the difference between life and death. Long before history books recorded their deeds, battlefield messengers galloped through the imagination of medieval Europe in songs and stories that blurred the line between man and myth. The Black Rider of Germanic folklore wasn't just a courier. He was a spectral figure who could outpace the wind itself, his cloak billowing like storm clouds as he carried warnings of impending invasions. French troubadours sang of the phantom courier, a murdered messenger whose ghostly horse still pounded along moonlit roads, its rider compelled by unfinished duty. These weren't mere campfire tales. They were cultural mirrors reflecting how societies processed the terrifying fragility of communication in an age where so much depended on one rider's survival. What makes these legends so fascinating is how they exaggerate real messenger traits into superhuman feats. A courier who survived an arrow wound might become, in song, a warrior who rode 3 days with a shaft through his chest. The Breton ballad of Jan Argall tells of a messenger who swam across the English Channel with a letter clenched in his teeth, a fantastical twist on the very real Channel swimmers who dodged pirate patrols. These embellishments served a deeper purpose, transforming mortal men into symbols of resilience that entire communities could rally behind. When peasants sang of messengers who cheated death, they weren't just entertaining themselves, they were convincing themselves that against all odds, hope could outrun despair. Chronicles penned by monks often walked the tightrope between fact and folklore. The 12th century Gesta Francorum describes a crusader messenger who allegedly survived in the desert by drinking venomous snake blood, a detail modern readers might dismiss, until you consider accounts of Bedouin couriers using similar survival techniques. Even the Bayeux tapestry, that famed embroidered history, shows Harold's riders with impossibly elongated legs, their stretched proportions visually emphasizing their speed and endurance. These weren't careless inaccuracies, but deliberate myth-making, shaping how future generations would remember the messenger's role. The gendered dimensions of these stories reveal societal biases. While historical records confirm women served as messengers, ballads overwhelmingly cast them as tragic figures like the Scottish Maiden of the Mist, who drowned carrying a plea for mercy, or the Spanish Dove of Toledo, stabbed while disguised as a nun. Their tales emphasized sacrifice over cunning, while male counterparts were celebrated for outsmarting enemies. This dichotomy shows how folklore could both immortalize and confine, honoring real women's bravery while reinforcing restrictive gender norms. Religious motifs saturated these narratives. Many Slavic legends feature saintly messengers protected by miraculous intervention, a burning sword hovering over them as they slept, or angels guiding them through blizzards. The Irish courier of Clonmacnoise supposedly gained 3 extra hours of daylight through prayer to complete his mission. Such stories didn't just entertain, they reassured listeners that divine forces watched over those who served higher causes. In an era where death lurked around every bend, these spiritual overtones offered comfort that no rider truly traveled alone. The legacy of these myths lingers in surprising places. Tolkien's Shadowfax, the tireless horse of Middle-earth, owes much to medieval messenger legends. Game of Thrones' Raven system echoes the mystique of supernatural couriers. Even modern military slang like "going postal" traces back to the awe surrounding early mail carriers' relentless pace. These aren't just quaint relics, they're proof that humanity still romanticizes those who bridge the gaps between isolated worlds, whether with saddlebags or satellites. The stories may have faded, but their essence remains. In every era, we need heroes who remind us that no distance is too great, no night too dark for the right words to find their way home. 500 years may separate medieval messengers from modern military couriers, but strip away the technology, and you'll find the same heartbeat of urgency pulsing through both. Today's intelligence officers tapping encrypted messages into satellite phones aren't so different from 14th century riders memorizing coded dispatches. Both understand that in the high-stakes game of information, speed and secrecy are currencies more valuable than gold. Consider the modern battlefield where drones may scout ahead instead of falcons, yet the fundamental challenge remains unchanged: how to move critical knowledge through hostile territory without interception. The United States Marine Corps still trains its couriers in evasion techniques eerily reminiscent of medieval tactics, altering routes unpredictably, blending into civilian traffic, even using dead drops where hollowed-out tree trunks once hid scrolls. The parallels run deeper than mere methodology. Just as medieval kings relied on trusted families to produce generations of messengers, modern intelligence agencies cultivate legacy operatives, sons and daughters of spies who inherit not just tradecraft but an almost feudal sense of duty. The British SAS selection process, with its grueling endurance tests across the Brecon Beacons, would feel familiar to a 15th century courier undergoing trials in the Alps. And when a Russian sleeper agent in the 1980s received activation orders via a seemingly innocuous radio broadcast, they were employing the same principle as Byzantine messengers who hid battle plans in folk songs. The medium changes, but the art of steganography endures. What's truly fascinating are the unexpected reversals. In some ways, modern tech has made communication more vulnerable than ever. A medieval messenger could swallow a wax-sealed letter, but how do you destroy a digital transmission already bouncing between satellites? This paradox explains why elite forces increasingly return to analog methods, like the special operations teams in Afghanistan, who reverted to handwritten notes after realizing Taliban hackers couldn't intercept paper. Even the humble motorcycle courier, that relic of World War II, saw resurgence in Syria's conflict zones where electronic jamming rendered modern systems useless. Sometimes the oldest solutions outsmart the newest threats. Yet for all these similarities, one crucial difference emerges: the erosion of deniability. When a medieval messenger was caught, he might plausibly claim ignorance, his message coded, his identity concealed. But today's digital trails create accountability that would have terrified medieval spy masters. The 2010 exposure of a Russian spy ring in America wasn't due to some daring interception, but because their Wi-Fi router betrayed years of communications. No amount of horseback heroics could undo that kind of forensic paper trail. Perhaps this is why modern militaries still study medieval couriers, not just for their techniques, but for their mindset. In an era of AI and quantum encryption, there's still no algorithm for the human capacity to improvise under fire. When a Ukrainian drone operator in 2022, Joyeville, rigged a civilian walkie-talkie to coordinate resistance fighters, he channeled the same ingenuity as the Burgundian messenger who used cathedral bells to signal troop movements 600 years earlier. The tools evolve, but the game stays the same. Outthink, outmaneuver, and above all, deliver the message before the enemy delivers theirs. That relentless drive, more than any technology, is what truly binds these shadow warriors across the centuries. Recent excavations along old European trade routes have uncovered something extraordinary: narrow, deeply grooved paths cutting through forests and hugging ridgelines, their surfaces compacted by centuries of hoofbeats. These aren't just old roads, they're the fossilized remains of messenger highways, etched into the earth by countless riders racing against time. One such trail in the Black Forest, discovered during a highway expansion, revealed layers of crushed stone and horse manure dating back to the 12th century, perfectly aligned between the ruins of two forgotten watchtowers. The spacing of these waypoints tells a story, each roughly 10 miles apart, the maximum distance a galloping horse could sustain before exhaustion. Archaeologists call them whisper lines, the hidden infrastructure of medieval communication. But the real revelations come from smaller finds, objects dropped or discarded in haste. A metal detector survey near Burgundy unearthed a trove of lead tokens stamped with sigils, each no larger than a thumbnail. These weren't coins but authentication markers, the medieval equivalent of password fobs, carried by messengers to prove their legitimacy. Even more telling are the broken wax seals littering castle moats, their jagged edges showing where frantic recipients snapped them open. At Chateau-de-Caussy in France, conservators found a seal still clinging to its parchment scrap, bearing the teeth marks of a courier who tried to swallow it during capture. These fragments form a mosaic of desperation and precision, where every scrap of evidence rewrites our understanding of how information moved. The most startling discoveries lurk beneath unassuming fields. Geophysical surveys using ground-penetrating radar have exposed the foundations of clandestine relay stations, small, fortified buildings strategically placed where no villages stood. One such site in Yorkshire concealed a stone-lined cellar with remnants of dried meat and horse feed, its walls scorched by haste-lit fires. Nearby, a hollowed-out oak stump still cradled a rusted dagger and a folded lead sheet, likely a dead drop for sensitive dispatches. These weren't taverns or farmsteads but way stations operating in plain sight, their true purpose known only to a select few. Perhaps the most poignant artifacts are the personal ones. A dig along the old Via Francigena pilgrim route revealed a messenger's purse containing a smoothed river stone, a worry stone rubbed shiny by anxious fingers alongside a child's carved wooden toy. Together, they whisper of men who balanced duty with longing, their saddlebags holding not just kingdom-shaping documents but fragments of home. Even their horses left traces. Isotope analysis of teeth from skeletons found near these routes shows diets heavy in oats and beans, the fuel of elite courier mounts. What emerges from the dirt isn't just a map of routes but a testament to institutional ingenuity. The spacing of way stations mirrors modern cellular networks, ensuring no dead zones in critical corridors. The variety of seals and tokens points to standardized verification systems spanning multiple kingdoms, and the sheer durability of these paths, some still visible after 8 centuries, proves how thoroughly medieval societies invested in their information arteries. These discoveries do more than confirm old chronicles. They reveal a world where communication wasn't just an afterthought, but the fragile web holding civilization together. Every groove in those ancient trails, every discarded token, is a silent echo of hoofbeats that once carried the weight of empires. The question of whether to kill or capture an enemy messenger cut to the heart of medieval warfare's moral contradictions. On one hand, the chivalric code idealized fair play and respect for non-combatants, a principle that seemed to extend to those carrying messages rather than swords. Chroniclers praised nobles who granted safe passage to couriers, like the English knight Sir John Chandos, who famously allowed a French messenger to cross battle lines during the Poitiers campaign, declaring, "Let no man hinder him, for his tongue is his only weapon." Yet for every act of mercy, there were brutal counterexamples. When Saladin's forces intercepted Crusader messengers during the siege of Acre, they executed them publicly as psychological warfare, their severed heads catapulted into the Christian camp as grim proof of intercepted communications. This inconsistency wasn't just hypocrisy, it reflected a deeper tension between ideals and necessity. Messengers occupied a gray zone between combatant and civilian. While they rarely fought, their words could doom entire armies. The 12th century legal scholar Gratian argued that harming unarmed couriers violated divine law, but his contemporary, the strategist Raymond of Aguilas, countered that letting enemy dispatches through was tantamount to surrendering advantage. Even the famed rules of chivalry, penned by the Burgundian knight Geoffroy de Charny, waffled on the issue, praising mercy in one passage while acknowledging that necessity knows no law in another. The treatment of captured messengers often hinged on circumstance. During truces or formal parleys, most commanders extended diplomatic immunity, fearing retaliation against their own couriers. But in the heat of campaign season, all bets were off. The fate of the Aragonese messenger Ramon de Perillos in 1382 illustrates this stark divide. Captured by Castilian forces during peacetime negotiations, he was treated as an honored guest. That same year, another Aragonese rider seized during a skirmish was summarily hanged as a spy. The difference: the first carried peace terms, the second bore troop movements. Religious identity further complicated matters. Christian and Islamic legal traditions both condemned killing messengers in theory, but holy wars frequently overrode such scruples. When Saladin's envoys were slain by Crusader zealots in 1187, Muslim chroniclers decried it as barbarism. Yet just years later, Saladin's own troops slaughtered Templar couriers during the siege of Jacob's Ford. The double standard was nakedly pragmatic. Messengers were protected when their deaths might unite enemies, but expendable when terror served strategy better. Modern parallels abound. The Geneva Conventions explicitly protect wartime messengers, yet contemporary conflicts still see signal interceptors targeted as high-value assets. Just as medieval lords debated whether a courier's knowledge made him a combatant, today's militaries grapple with whether a drone operator transmitting data is fair game. The core dilemma remains unchanged. In warfare, is information itself a weapon? The medieval answer was as messy as ours: sometimes yes, sometimes no, always depending on who stood to gain. What's revealing isn't their inconsistency, but ours. After 8 centuries, we still haven't resolved whether the person carrying the message is part of the battle, or just the unlucky soul caught between those who are. While Europe's messengers navigated dense forests and castle sieges, halfway across the world, the Mongol Empire was perfecting a communication network so vast it made European systems look sluggish by comparison. At its height, Genghis Khan's Yam stations spanned nearly 6,000 miles from the steppes of Central Asia to the edges of Eastern Europe. A logistical masterpiece that could relay messages faster than any army could march. Picture a chain of wayposts staffed with fresh horses, armed guards, and interpreters, each spaced a day's ride apart. A single rider would burst into a station, hand off his dispatches to the next courier, and collapse as the new messenger thundered onward without missing a beat. The system was so efficient that Marco Polo claimed urgent news could travel up to 300 miles in just 24 hours. A speed unmatched until the industrial age. But what truly set the Yam apart wasn't just its speed, it was its ruthless pragmatism. Any station master failing to provide fresh mounts faced execution, a policy that ensured flawless operation even in blizzards or enemy raids. Meanwhile, in the deserts of the Islamic world, Arab messengers known as Barid riders turned the harsh landscape into an advantage. Where European couriers relied on forests for cover, these riders mastered the art of crossing vast, open terrain under the relentless sun. Their secret, a network of caravanserais, fortified inns with deep wells spaced along trade routes like stepping stones across the sands. Unlike Mongol messengers who prioritized raw speed, Arab couriers emphasized endurance and discretion. Many memorized entire messages in poetic form, turning dispatches into rhythmic verses easier to retain during grueling journeys. Some even trained carrier pigeons as backups, creating a hybrid system where birds handled short-range alerts while human riders delivered complex negotiations. The Caliphate's barred service became so revered that its riders carried silver badges granting them immunity from tolls and the right to demand food or shelter from any village, a medieval version of diplomatic immunity. Far to the east, Japan's shoguns developed their own answer to the communication challenge, the Hikyoku system, where runners instead of horsemen darted along the Tokaido Road. These weren't just any couriers, they were elite athletes who could cover 50 miles a day on foot, their stamina honed through years of training. Stationed at relay posts called shuku eki, they passed batons containing scrolls rather than risking oral errors. What's fascinating is how geography shaped their methods. In a land of narrow mountain paths and sudden storms, horses were often more liability than asset. So while European messengers galloped, Japanese couriers sprinted in lightweight straw sandals, their journeys immortalized in woodblock prints, showing them leaping over streams or dodging bandit arrows. The Inca Empire, lacking horses or written language, engineered perhaps the most ingenious solution of all, the chasqui runners. Along the spine of the Andes, thousands of way stations dotted a 15,000-mile road network. When a messenger arrived, he'd blow a conch shell to alert the next runner, who'd then sprint ahead while memorizing the quipu, a bundle of knotted cords encoding everything from troop movements to tax records. The system was so precise that fresh fish from the coast could reach the mountain capital of Cusco before spoiling, a feat that still stuns historians. These global systems reveal a universal truth. Every culture, whether facing deserts, mountains, or open steppes, recognized that information was power. The Mongols prioritized imperial control, the Arabs valued poetic precision, the Japanese focused on human endurance, and the Incas turned knots into a language. Their methods differed wildly, but their purpose was identical: to conquer distance before distance could conquer them. What's striking isn't just their innovation, but how each solution was perfectly tailored to its environment, proving that necessity doesn't just invent, it adapts. The hoofbeats of medieval messengers may have faded into history, but their legacy gallops through time in ways that still shape our world. Modern military couriers inherit more than just their job description. They carry forward an unbroken chain of traditions stretching back centuries. The distinctive red stripes on British Royal Marines dress uniforms, originally worn by dispatch riders in the Napoleonic Wars as a visual signal of their vital role. The United States Army's Message to Garcia training exercise, where recruits must navigate obstacle courses with sealed envelopes, a direct descendant of medieval messenger trials that tested both physical endurance and mental resilience under pressure. Even the term "going postal," though now associated with workplace frustration, originates from the 19th century Pony Express riders who embodied relentless determination. Cryptography owes these forgotten couriers an enormous debt. The complex cipher systems used by medieval messengers formed the foundation of modern encryption. When a World War II codebreaker at Bletchley Park studied the intricate symbol substitutions in a 12th century papal dispatch, they weren't just examining ancient history, they were looking at the conceptual ancestor of the Enigma machine. Today's cybersecurity protocols still employ principles first tested by messengers hiding messages in wax seals or using carefully placed pinpricks in parchment. The digital signatures verifying our online transactions, spiritual successors to the broken wax seals that once authenticated royal decrees, logistics networks worldwide bear the fingerprints of medieval ingenuity. Amazon's distribution hubs and FedEx's overnight delivery systems mirror the relay stations that dotted Byzantine trade routes, just with drones replacing horses. The GPS tracking numbers we casually check on our phones fulfill the same psychological need as the tally sticks medieval way stations used to confirm a messenger's progress, reassurance that vital information is moving safely through an uncertain world. Even disaster response teams organizing supply chains after hurricanes owe their playbook to medieval systems designed to bypass destroyed bridges and blocked mountain passes. But perhaps the most profound inheritance lies in how we conceptualize information itself. Medieval messengers understood something we're only now fully appreciating: that knowledge isn't just power, it's vulnerability. The same awareness that had riders swallowing dispatches rather than risk capture now drives corporations to invest billions in data protection. When whistleblowers today hide USB drives in Apples or use burner phones, they're employing tactics straight from the messenger's playbook. The dark web's dead drops and encryption echo the hollowed-out staffs and coded songs of centuries past. What makes their legacy truly timeless isn't the techniques they pioneered, but the ethos they embodied. In an age before instant communication, these riders demonstrated that trust is the most fragile yet essential element of any society. Their stories challenge us to consider who carries our most vital messages today, not just military dispatches, but the nurses relaying critical lab results, the journalists smuggling truth past censors, the activists preserving endangered knowledge. The medium has changed from parchment to pixels, but the fundamental human drama remains. Someone must always brave the distance between those who know and those who need to know. That unbroken line of silent runners, from medieval forests to modern server farms, forms the hidden nervous system of civilization itself. Their greatest lesson wasn't about speed or secrecy, but about the quiet courage required to keep the world connected when everything conspires to tear it apart. Hollywood would have you believe medieval messengers were little more than expendable errand boys, background characters, galloping into frame just in time to deliver a plot point before vanishing into obscurity. But peel back the layers of cinematic shorthand, and you'll uncover a reality far richer than any sword and sandals epic dares to show. These weren't just men who happened to own horses. They were the special forces of their day, selected for their photographic memories, linguistic prowess, and ability to think 3 moves ahead of danger. Take the case of the Burgundian courier corps, whose initiation rites included a harrowing midnight ride through bandit territory with nothing but a candle's worth of wax to seal their lips if captured. This wasn't just a job, it was a vocation demanding skills as diverse as cryptography, meteorology, and battlefield triage. The myth of their disposability crumbles under historical scrutiny. Far from being lowborn pawns, many messengers held titles equivalent to modern field officers. In the English court, the title King's Runner came with land grants and the right to dine in the royal halls, while Venetian courier ducali wore silver medallions granting them authority to requisition ships at will. Their trustworthiness was so absolute that some became de facto diplomats, like the Castilian messenger Alfonso de Mercado, who negotiated the Treaty of Toledo in 1368 with powers exceeding modern ambassadors. When a kingdom's survival hinged on every syllable reaching its destination unaltered, you didn't entrust that responsibility to just anyone with a fast horse. Perhaps the most persistent misconception is that their work was mindless repetition. In truth, medieval warfare's fluid nature demanded constant improvisation. A messenger might depart with one set of orders only to encounter shifting battle lines requiring real-time adjustments. The chronicles of the 100 Years' War describe French couriers who carried multiple sealed variants of the same dispatch, selecting which to deliver based on reconnaissance en route, an early form of conditional decision-making that would make any modern operations officer nod in recognition. Their ability to operate without supervision in chaotic environments suggests a level of autonomy and judgment we typically associate with elite military units today. Even their supposed anonymity is exaggerated. While many names are lost, others echo through history with surprising clarity. The Saxon messenger Widukind not only survived countless missions, but later became a chronicler whose writings shape our understanding of 10th century Europe. Then there's the curious case of Johanna of Brabant, a noblewoman who served as her father's chief courier before ruling the duchy herself, proof that messenger service could be a stepping stone to power rather than a dead-end role. What these misconceptions obscure is the profound sophistication of medieval warfare's nervous system. Armies didn't blunder blindly across landscapes. They moved with precision, guided by human networks as complex as any digital grid. The next time you see a film reduce these figures to faceless riders thundering into tents with dusty scrolls, remember the reality. They were the original intelligence operatives, their minds as sharp as any blade, their loyalty the glue holding empires together. In an age before satellites and radios, these men and women didn't just deliver messages, they carried the future of nations in their saddlebags, and history owes them more than cinematic obscurity. The thunder of hooves still echoes across fields today, not in war, but in revival. Across Europe and North America, living history enthusiasts don replica chainmail and leather satchels to resurrect the world of medieval battlefield messengers with startling accuracy. At events like England's annual Couriers Challenge, riders navigate obstacle courses designed from historical accounts, fording rivers on horseback, deciphering coded messages under time pressure, even evading bandits played by fellow reenactors armed with blunted swords. The realism is palpable. Participants endure sleepless night rides and sustain themselves on period-appropriate rations of hardtack and dried meat, experiencing firsthand the exhaustion that shadowed their historical counterparts. What sets these reenactments apart from casual cosplay is their academic rigor. Groups like the Society for Creative Anachronism collaborate with medieval historians to recreate authentic messenger gear down to the stitching patterns of 12th century saddlebags. At the University of Geneva's Experimental Archaeology Lab, researchers have tested replica wax seals against medieval recipes, discovering that a mix of beeswax and vermilion pigment, identical to residues found on original documents, created seals durable enough to survive rough journeys yet brittle enough to show tampering. This fusion of scholarship and physicality offers insights no textbook could. When a reenactor in Poland demonstrated that memorized messages stayed accurate over 50 miles of riding but deteriorated sharply beyond that, it confirmed theories about medieval relay station spacing. Educational outreach brings these experiments to life for modern audiences. At Castel del Monte in Italy, costumed interpreters demonstrate how messengers use the castle's unique octagonal architecture to amplify sound signals, a revelation that emerged from reenactors testing voice projection between towers. Meanwhile, the Young Couriers program at French heritage sites teaches children to encode messages using medieval ciphers, their laughter belying the gravity of skills that once decided battles. The most poignant moments often come from unexpected details. Visitors to a Scottish living history event gasped when a rider's horse instinctively shied from a waving banner, a visceral reminder of how wartime environments challenged even the most trained steeds. Beyond recreation, these efforts preserve endangered equestrian skills. The Spanish Camino del Corio race revives the post routes of the Reconquista, with riders mastering the delicate balance of speed and endurance that defined Iberian couriers. Participants learn to read terrain as their ancestors did, spotting the safest river crossings or recognizing which hills offered vantage points without silhouetting themselves against the sky. Such nuances, once passed down through generations, might have vanished entirely without these dedicated revivalists. The impact resonates far beyond history buffs. Modern emergency responders have adapted medieval messenger techniques for disaster zones where technology fails. After Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rican volunteers used hand signals from 14th century trail markers to guide rescue teams through shattered communities. Special Forces units now study reenactor findings on how fatigue affects message retention, proof that these historical echoes still shape life and death decisions today. What begins as homage often becomes revelation. When a German reenactor recently completed a 3-day ride along the old imperial post route using only period maps, his journal entries mirrored the frustrations of a 15th century courier. The ford was deeper than remembered. The villagers lied about the bandits. This raw immediacy bridges centuries, reminding us that the past isn't a static display but a living pulse, one still felt in the creak of saddle leather, the crunch of gravel under hoofbeats, and the unbroken human drive to connect, no matter the obstacles. In a world where messages circle the globe at the speed of light, the plodding hoofbeats of medieval couriers might appear quaint, even irrelevant, but pause for a moment and consider the modern parallels. Every time a journalist shields a source, a whistleblower encrypts a file, or a nurse hand-delivers critical lab results when systems fail, they're walking the same razor's edge those ancient messengers once did. The technology has changed, but the human drama remains identical. The weight of trust, the gamble against time, the knowledge that some truths are too fragile to entrust to the wind. Take cybersecurity teams battling data breaches today. Their frantic efforts to patch vulnerabilities mirror the medieval messengers who constantly adapted their routes and ciphers. When a hacker intercepts sensitive emails, it's no different in principle from an English longbowman picking off a French courier at Agincourt. The stakes are just as high, only now the battlefield is digital and the arrows are lines of malicious code. Even our modern obsession with read receipts and typing indicators echoes the medieval need for confirmation. A wax seal broken by the right hands meant safety. Today's encrypted read notifications serve the same psychological purpose, proof that words arrived intact. There's a deeper lesson here about resilience. Medieval messengers didn't have backup satellites or redundant servers. When a bridge was out or a horse went lame, they improvised, swimming rivers, forging new paths, sometimes even disguising themselves as minstrels to slip past enemies. That same spirit thrives in today's crisis responders. During Hurricane Maria's aftermath, when cell towers failed, volunteers became human routers, memorizing lists of survivors and running them between shelters. In war zones, doctors stitch USB drives with patient records into clothing. Just as messengers once hid scrolls in their boots, the tools evolve, but the ingenuity doesn't. Perhaps most crucially, their stories rebuke our age of disposable communication. A medieval messenger's life might hinge on a single sentence, so every word was chosen with care, every syllable memorized with reverence. Contrast that with today's barrage of half-formed tweets and hasty emails. Their world reminds us that communication isn't just about speed, it's about weight. When a single message could start a war or save a city, language wasn't tossed like confetti, it was forged like steel. This isn't just about admiring the past. It's about recognizing that our slick digital networks rest on the same frail human foundations. Every time a server crashes or a deepfake spreads, we're forced to relearn their old lessons. That trust must be earned, that speed without security is recklessness, and that sometimes, often the most vital connections are made not by algorithms, but by flesh and blood courage. The messengers may have hung up their cloaks, but their shadows still stretch across our keyboards and touchscreens. whispering that no matter how advanced we become, some truths will always need a human hand to carry them home. The untold history of battlefield messengers is a testament to human ingenuity and bravery in the darkest of times. These riders didn't just carry letters, they carried the fragile hopes of entire nations, balancing the weight of empires on their shoulders with nothing but a horse's stamina and their own quick wits. Imagine the sheer audacity it took to gallop alone through enemy territory, knowing every shadow could hide an ambush, every stranger might be a traitor. Yet they rode anyway, not for glory, but because the world depended on their success. Their stories reveal a truth we often forget. History isn't just shaped by kings and battles, but by the quiet courage of those who made sure the right words reached the right ears at the right moment. What's truly remarkable is how their innovations echo through the ages. The coded languages they invented live on in modern encryption. Their relay stations foreshadowed today's fiber optic networks, and their relentless pursuit of speed birthed the very idea of real-time communication. When you hit send on an encrypted message or track a package moving across continents in hours, you're benefiting from principles these medieval couriers risked their lives to perfect. Their legacy isn't locked in the past, it pulses through every digital heartbeat of our connected world. But beyond technology, their greatest gift was a lesson in resilience. In an era without safety nets or second chances, these messengers adapted to every obstacle: blizzards, bandits, betrayals, with a creativity that still inspires. They remind us that progress isn't just about new tools, but about the unyielding human spirit that wields them. Whether navigating by starlight or memorizing dispatches to outwit interceptors, they proved that limitations are just invitations to innovate. As the dust of centuries settles over their hoofbeats, their stories challenge us to look closer at our own unsung heroes. The nurses racing between hospital rooms, the journalists smuggling truth past censors, the volunteers braving disaster zones, they are all inheritors of that same defiant spirit. The mediums have changed, but the mission hasn't: to bridge the gaps between isolated worlds, no matter the cost. So the next time you effortlessly video call someone across oceans or receive a life-saving alert on your phone, take a moment to honor those who paved the way. Their history isn't just a relic, it's a mirror reflecting our own interconnected age, and a reminder that every message we send still rides on the backs of those who taught us how to outrun the darkness. If these forgotten couriers have a lesson for us today, it's this: information is only as powerful as the courage of those willing to carry it. And that's a truth as timeless as the open road.